Hey, so I'm Dave March, and welcome to the Land of Confusion Ricochet show. And as usual, here's my co-host.
I'm Don Tillman in
And,
sunny Palo Alto
yep,
today, as usual.
and we
And who do we
are
have for
today.
our guest today?
Yeah, and today we're interviewing Eherring from Ricochet. So she's been actually telling me all about her military career for the last 20 minutes because she showed up early. So, but we'll probably get to some of that later. But I just want to hear from Don briefly because we've been talking about the California wildfires. How's it going down there in California?
Actually, it's kind of nice at this point. So yeah, like what was it last week? Of course, we had the orange, weird orange sky. Now we're fine. I could see across the bay. It's about 10 miles, so it's not up. It's only put it this way: like 3 days ago, visibility was under a mile, and and on a good day, you can see like 40 miles here.
Okay.
We don't have a lot of sources of pollution really, and we're on the Pacific, so there's nothing's going to come from that side, and so it's generally pretty nice. You could easily often have 30, 40, 50 mile visibility, but and now it's across the bay, so this is significantly better.
Okay, good. Well, we have Eherring.
That is the weather report.
Okay, cool.
I'll be giving you the weather report shortly because Sally's heading this way.
Oh, yes. Oh, first off, where are you?
I'm in a suburb of Columbia, South Carolina.
Oh.
Center of the state, Gamecock country, VUSC, not those men that wear skirts.
Okay, so why don't I start off with our usual
kilts or skirts?
Yeah, so, we're not the USC Trojans.
So where were you born, and what was it like growing up there?
Well, I was born in Columbia, South Carolina, but I didn't grow up here because my dad ended up moving from job to job. He was from Daytona, so he wanted to get back there, so he moved to Sarasota. I had a year there and a year in Tampa, and I barely remember him. Then he made it over to Daytona, which is the family home. We were there a couple years, and then he ended up having to move us back up to South Carolina, and that's a long story, but we moved to where my family's from on my mom's side in a small town in South Carolina, and I ended up growing up there, and it was great. It was in Marlboro County. And I grew up in a small town where everybody knew everybody else, and it was just pretty peaceful. And then I went to the University of South Carolina because that's what you do if you're a Gamecock, and that's in Columbia. And so I was there 2 years, went off, taught high school for a year, went back to Columbia to get my master's degree for 2 years. And then I said, okay, I'm not going to go back to a small town because I haven't done anything yet. So I just up and went in the Air Force with a master's degree and said I'm going in for 4 and stayed for 20. And so much for that. But small town life is great. I am still a member of my hometown church, even though I've moved all over the world. And I go back there every now and then and for stuff and all that, but it was a good life growing up. I had a happy childhood.
You consider yourself a conservative, classical, liberal, libertarian?
I don't really think of those really in any of those terms. I am who I am, and I can't remember being anything else, but it's more like classical conservative.
Okay.
But it's just like whatever I am now, I've always been. College didn't ruin me, in other words.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like maybe you went to the right kind of school, or how was college for you?
College was great. I went there. I ended up majoring in Spanish, even though I never had it till I got there. And all, I just had good Spanish teachers, and And I had to play catch up by going to summer school after my sophomore year. And after that, I poured it on and loved every minute of it. I had good professors, and I ended up minoring in astronomy because I had a good professor there who, if you were interested, he'd get to know you, even though he had a class of 150 people. And I ended up getting a key to the observatory and working there on Monday nights. And yeah, I had the run of the place. I could use the observatory, take pictures, develop them there in the basement. And I mean, I was in the marching band that went all over the place, and we would go on the field with a monster amount of people and all that. And I still have friends in the band, and every year they do alumni band, and some years I sign up and I get to go on the football field for pregame and halftime with my little piccolo, and just like I was a kid again.
I really like the concept of the keys to the observatory.
Oh, yeah, well,
It's like,
it
hey
was
babe,
pretty cool.
I got
It
the
was
keys
something.
to the observatory. That is a great one.
Well, if you'd been in the basement, you'd think, well, they could have done Frankenstein here, you know, but you had to go up this black spiral staircase to get up to the telescope, and
Right.
it had the rotating dome, and it was a 16-inch reflector, which means it was about that big. And I had a lot of fun with that. I did that for 2 years, my last 2 years there, and I have my own telescope now.
What
I
were your
didn't go 60, like this big round.
What were your favorite sites to look at?
I enjoy looking at the planets because they're easy. And I mean, looking at Jupiter, you can go out with binoculars and see 4 of the moons and stuff. But I like hunting for things nobody else could find. And one of them was the Ring Nebula in Lyra. So I would go, and the guys would find the easy stuff, and then I'd go find some of the harder stuff. And my husband and I, when we got my telescope, I was stationed at Homestead south of Miami, and we'd put Michelle to bed, and then we'd go out in the backyard with champagne in lounge chairs, and he would find something with the telescope, and it'd take him a while, and I'd sit there and drink champagne, and then it'd be my turn, and he'd sit and drink champagne, and I'd find something.
Well, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, we would just go hunting for things. And I'll tell you something about the universe. When you see how vast it is and how much out there that you can even fathom, it's just amazing what the universe is. I can't imagine existing without a God out there creating it, because it's just an amazing time machine. Everything you look at, you're looking back in time.
Yeah, and that's the vastness of it is, I think, the reason we'll never see aliens, because the time it takes to travel from one area to another.
We might have aliens much closer to home here, Don. Didn't you hear about Venus?
Area 51.
Supports life, right? Or it was some evidence.
Yeah, there's some sort of gas, phosgene gas or something that's usually created by animal life, and it's being found in the atmosphere, and there's a lot of it. They're wondering if it could be some sort of microbe organism. And then they're like, apparently at the beginning of the solar system, planets kind of intermingled. So they're wondering if it might be life from here, or that's over there, or it's just developed on its own.
Interesting. But yeah, we're kind of ruined because we watch any sci-fi movie or TV show, right? where the craft goes,
and again,
it's so impractical.
There is something that does that. My husband said at his Air Force Academy graduation, an SR-71 did the flyover, and it came over the field, and then it hit the burner, and it was like that going into light speed. It was there, and then it was gone. And so it does happen. It's kind of like we had flip phones, which were just like the communicators on Star Trek. Some of that stuff happens.
Yeah.
Well, it's whatever the government's even come out and now admitted to the Foo Fighters that are out there and saying that, Yeah, there's these strange atmospheric things that are floating around. We do get like radar images off of them, and we have no idea what they are, and they behave like nothing else on the planet.
Yeah. Well, we were stationed at Homestead when Halley's Comet came through. And so we had the telescope, and some friends said, hey, let's go down in the Keys because it's supposed to be dark down there. Mm-hmm. And so we read up and found out University of Miami was going to be about halfway down in the Keys. So we said, well, let's go to the island they're going to because they know something. So we packed up the telescope and our buds, and we drove down there, pulled off, and went down on the edge of the water where everybody was setting up, and never saw the University of Miami people, but we put up my telescope, looked south, and we found the comet rather quickly, and we looked, they looked, we looked, they looked. It's like, oh, okay. So they said, was there anything else to see? And I said, well, yeah, up in the north, I can show you two galaxies that you can see in the same eyepiece at the same time. And they were north, a totally other direction. I think it was M81 and 82. So I pointed the telescope due north and found them. And we were looking through there just having a good time. And here, we didn't realize it, but all the drunks down there wanting to look through everybody's telescope thought we were looking at Halley's Comet. So we looked down there, there's this whole row of maybe 30, 40 people looking north trying to find the comet. And they weren't looking in the right direction. And finally one came over and said, are you looking at Halley's Comet? We went, no. And they were, well, can you? So we pointed the telescope back in the other direction, and all those people went, oh, and they turned the binoculars around and looked the other way. We were like, what? The rain started. I see some drips. Rain. Okay, but that was a lot of fun watching those, trying to, but it was a good time. That's one of the few times I've been in a really dark sky.
And you had to go to an island for that.
Yeah. Although you can buy filters for your telescope. Like there's a narrowband filter that I bought, and it filters out the wavelengths for your street lights. So it's kind of the same effect as having a dark sky, because everything you see is wavelengths anyway.
Interesting. I bet that's changing now, because they used to have like more sodium-based lights, and now we're going to LEDs. The wavelengths are different.
Yeah, I'm probably going to be in a bind of hurt until I find out what wavelength and somebody comes out with one, or I'll just have to pack up. I'm not that far from the country here. We're on the edge of farmland and a lot of horse corns and stuff like that here.
Yeah, it's good to have an unpopulated area near you for this sort of thing, certainly.
I think the amazing thing is hunting for planets, because stars are just twinkling points of light, and the moment you stumble on one of our planets, it's a little round ball instead of a twinkling point of light.
Yeah.
And that's just a lot of fun to, Jupiter and Saturn and Mars are easy, but you start hunting for Uranus or something.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Pretty far out there.
Of John Walker, who used to be a Ricochet member, had set up this website that one of the features of it is it has a map of all the positions of the stars and planets. And he built this, and it was all hand-coded. Wow. And I used to use that as a reference to see where stuff was. And he was, at the time, he's living in Switzerland. He was a regular. He used to do a lot of stuff on Ricochet.
I probably conversed with him. Wasn't there an astronomy forum that was active for a while?
Maybe. I don't know.
Group?
But he was the guy who did Saturday Science column every Saturday.
I remember that column. That was very active when I first joined.
Yeah. So he left Ricochet and started a competing site, Ratburger. And that's where a bunch of people who left were also with Ricochet, but there's this competing site. Not competing so much, but it's similar.
Different
no podcast.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm totally content.
But yeah, his site was called Fermilab, and sort of like a variation on Fermilab. And it was a very powerful tool. You could look up anytime, look up where all the planets are. I think there's apps for that now, though. Just point you there.
Yeah. You can buy Astronomy magazine. They have all that in the centerfold every month, and they have
Ooh, the
Jupiter's
centerfold.
moon. So, yeah, it's my kind of centerfold.
It's a staple through Saturn. What's going on?
Yeah, but they also show Jupiter's moons each night. So if you take your binoculars out and see the little blips on each side, you can look at it and look at the day and see the name of each moon, the four biggest ones.
Well, we just briefly talked about Ricochet there, and one of the usual questions asked is, how did you find Ricochet?
Nice segue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I found it because of, that's a James Lilacs quality segue there.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it because of National Review cruises. There's so much overlap. And I remember, Rob Long and all of them were on there, and they mentioned it. And I said, well, if there's this much fun here, then I got to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, after that, whatever cruise they mentioned it on, I came over and joined. And then I remember on another cruise, everybody was all excited. I ran into some Ricochet people, and they said, hey, the Blue Yeti's here. I said, I didn't know what a Blue Yeti was. But I ended up finding out in a hurry who Blue Yeti was, and ended up he was sitting at our table one night. So we got to talk to him quite a lot. He's really a cool guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not actually blue.
What?
No,
Mm-hmm. It's a fun little fact. He will be our guest next week for our 20th
cool.
show. And when I first mentioned him, he's like, why would anyone want to talk to me? Like, you're the guy who's running things behind the scene. You're the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Everyone wants to talk to you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah, Max was a lot of fun to listen to last time.
Mm-hmm.
And the server.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like that. It was like we went behind the secret things, and it's this tiny little thing. All ricochets in that box.
I love that he's in this little town, tiny little town in New Hampshire. And that's just great.
So you mentioned that you're doing after school things for your grandkids. You also said something about homeschooling? Is that something you're still doing?
Well, the teachers are scared to death to be around kids a lot, so they agreed to a hybrid model.
As it should be.
I hope it wasn't, anything that any of our kids did, but they go to school normally on Monday and Tuesday, like they did last year until the COVID hit, and then they get picked up by PAC and go to the after-school program there, and their parents pick them up there. Wednesday and Thursday, the other half of their class goes to school, and they have to do homeschool Wednesday, Thursday, and then all of the kids do homeschool on Friday. And they have Zoom meetings with the teacher. So what happens is the other grandparents live the closest to my kid, my daughter and her husband. So they drop the kids off early in the morning with them, get breakfast, and they homeschool them in the morning with whatever assignments the teachers give them, feed them lunch, then bring them over here in the afternoon. And then we homeschool them in the afternoon doing all their assignments. And then their parents pick them up and take them home.
Okay.
Only we're keeping them overnight tonight and Thursday night because their schedule is such. The other grandparents are going out of town today, so they would have to drive all the way across town early in the morning to deliver them. So we said, hey, just leave them with us and we'll do everything since we got to homeschool them first, do it the whole day tomorrow and Friday.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun. And we did it once school closed in March. We ended up doing it through the end of May, last spring, and then we had summer off, and they put them in daycare as soon as daycare opened and let them play with kids and come home with sniffles and sneezes, develop their immunity and get through it. And then when school started, we haven't had any issues.
Yeah. Well, around here, schooling is like, I think we adopted mostly what Britain and Australia have done. So kids show up at different times, but they do the full week. And it's been going for 2-3 weeks now. So if we're going to have the outbreak, it should be right about now. But I don't. All the science I can tell indicates that we won't, because kids are not immune, but don't die.
Right? I don't get the logic of half of them one day, one Monday and Tuesday, and the other half on Wednesday and Thursday. If any of them's going to bring it to school, it's going to get passed around no matter what.
Yep.
And one of the schools was saying, we don't want to have any kids in school at all. And then they said, well, we'll do them the every other day thing, but for parents who are working, we'll have daycare at school every day. And we're like, okay, how does that work? This district finally came up with this plan, which was a compromise for everybody. And they're supposed to relook at it at the end of September and see if in October they're going to go back to regular schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that said, putting myself in the position of, say, the school board or whoever's making this decision, you've probably got a lot of crazed voices on all sides going at you. Mm-hmm. And you're probably in the position of having to put out some compromise schedule that'll minimize the number of citizens, constituents, parents screaming at you. And that's probably it may not end up being really sensible. Mm-hmm. With respect to the disease.
It's a good district, though. The schools are so good that the district's growing by leaps and bounds. Every time you turn around, they're throwing in a new housing development because everybody wants to move here because all the schools here exceed the national average. Mm. And so it's you hear about South Carolina right down here. It's the kid, it's only certain counties in the state that pull the state average down, but you get in other counties and you have very good schools. Mm-hmm. and all that. This is a real good district, though.
Yeah. No, around here, for me in Ontario, basically the schools all came up with crazy plans, the school districts, but the province has to approve them. And the province is like, nope, we're just going to put everyone back in there and just 1 week. It's all week long, but you have kids showing up at different times and different classes play with have recess. So they staggered everything out so that basically your class is the one thing that goes in and that's it. So that class does everything. There's no longer you're crossing the school to go to different classrooms, you stay in your classroom, and then you do recess staggered. So seems to work.
Yeah, what I think they've done here is Monday and Tuesday is half the class, and Wednesday and Thursday are the other half that belong to the teacher. And then on Friday, she does Zooms and lets them do catch up if they haven't gotten their home stuff done. And so they have half the kids at the school, and it's a lot better than we had in the spring where they didn't have any interaction other than Zoom meetings with the students for several months. And we would pick up 6 weeks of work at a time, and there wasn't as much feedback. So we ended up supplementing with a lot of other stuff. And there was some online sites they went to, they could do activities, and the teachers could see how much time they spent doing their math problems or reading problems and see how they did. But this is actually, what they'd be doing in the class at home to be done. And the school issued both for my second grade grandchildren a tablet, and the fourth graders getting a Chromebook whenever they come in. So they're sending them home with their own technology, and they came with all the programs they have to access to do their work. So that made it a lot simpler.
Well, it's just interesting to see how this is all working out and having someone being able to explain to us the differences on stuff, because we see stuff on TV, but we never get to hear it from how it's working out.
It's working out fine as long as, since we have 2 sets of grandparents with their, standing over them, we can usually finish the work a lot quicker than parents who may not see their kids till they get home at night after work. And so the workload you can finish in a hurry. And so we end up finding other things. We make them go read books and stuff or do more online stuff.
The use of Chromebooks, I think, is interesting. my kids' schools gave them out a few years ago to anybody who wanted them, and they're not a full tilt computer. It's kids call them the sketchy Chromebooks, and because they're very limited. They're only a browser, and you can't actually install any software on them. But for kids in school, they're a pretty good job. I think it's getting away from the traditional computer paradigm and going to a you're probably spending most of your time in a browser anyway. You might as well do everything in a browser, and we can make it super cheap and super robust and safe from crazy software. Safe from viral software and things. So it makes a lot of sense, I think.
Well, our grandkids are pretty comfortable. We'd throw them on the computer and they would go in PowerPoint and make briefings. And if that computer was occupied, I'd hand them the MacBook and they'd go on there and on the keynotes and figure out how to do it. And you didn't even have to really show them much. They just like playing, and they would do their stories. Getting them to write on paper is hard, but you put them on a computer and say, do this or do that, and then they go to town.
Interesting. I'll just get back to the last Ricochet question before we continue on. What do you most like about Ricochet?
All the people and all the interesting subjects and all the opinions. And sometimes I don't agree with people, but sometimes I figure out, well, maybe they got a better idea than what I had. But it's the community.
Okay, cool.
It's exactly like a National Review cruise, only National Review cruises are face-to-face, and on Ricochet, you're typing words.
And Ricochet's only costing you like $50 a year.
Yeah.
Cheaper than a cruise.
Costs a lot cheaper than a cruise, and I don't know when National Review is going to get the cruise again. So Ricochet might be it for quite a while.
My understanding, it could be next spring, because I keep walking by a local tourist store, and they're talking about boat cruises on rivers and lakes being possible. And National Review in the past, I know, has done like the Great Lakes tour or other river tours. And I think that might be possible again come this next summer, if that's what they're going to look at.
Yeah, their last riverboat cruise that was canceled for COVID is rescheduled for next July. And same cruise, but I can't sign up and go because we had already booked a cruise with my sister. She wanted us to go do one with them, and it's London around to Iceland and back to London. And so we decided to do a family thing, and we had already signed up and committed and made our deposit, and so we can't do the National Review one. But I'm an optimist. I signed up for a January 9th cruise out of Fort Lauderdale on to New Amsterdam into the Caribbean, and I signed up for a May cruise out of Montreal, hopefully, to Boston, because I really enjoyed visiting Montreal last year and seeing Quebec and going around to all the little islands and Halifax and all of that. That was the best cruise I'd ever been on. It's great.
Well, have you been to Boston before?
On that cruise, we got off the ship, went around the other side, and got on an airplane. But I flew into Boston quite a lot when I was in the Air Force, because we'd go up to Hanscom Field north of there and rent a car and drive through that circling loop, through the tunnels and through the circling, up the interstates. And I used to say that Boston was the only place I ever rented a car where I kissed the ground when I got back safely to the airport.
I believe that.
Yeah, we were at a meeting one time, and one guy asked me if I was driving back to the airport, and obviously it was his first time. I said, yeah. And he said, well, can I follow you? I said, sure. Then he said, well, how do you do that circle where there are all cars from all different directions going in? How do you know when to go? And I said, I stop, count to 3, and I go, and it's worked every time so far.
I used to live in Boston in the 80s, so I loved it. I miss it.
Went there for myself for the first time last year around this time, like to visit my girlfriend. She lives in New Brunswick. So I stopped off and bought, my friend's like, you're going to drive through the States. You should stop off and visit Boston and I did. And I My favorite part was walking the bridge from the Banachek TV show.
Hmm.
I went down to Harvard. That was fun.
Yeah, I remember I saw old Ironsides down below when we were driving out. If the guys were driving, then I could look around.
Mhm.
And Hanscom's between Lexington and Concord, so there's a
Yep.
lot of interesting stuff up there too.
Yeah.
And then at a station in Honduras, driving there, which is an amazing experience. And had to go to the meeting, the Hanscom from there. And it surprised me that after driving in Honduras for about 8 months, Boston didn't even faze me anymore. And it was like, nah, it's nothing. So, but we went back in there last year. My daughters wanted to do a family vacation and let the husband keep the kids. So they said, we want to go to Bar Harbor, but it doesn't look far from Boston to there. So we're going to fly into Boston and drive there. And it turned out to be longer than they had anticipated. But fortunately, leaving the airport and heading towards Maine is a lot easier than heading towards Hanscom. So, but it was like, I haven't seen the sights, and I'll probably do one of those post-cruise let them drive you around on the bus and show you things before they take you to the airport thing this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can spend a lot of time in the area because there's so much there.
Yeah.
And the Paul Revere stuff, Lexington Concord stuff is just wonderful, I think. And it's you feel all patriotic there.
I want to do Philadelphia also, and I think I'd probably do a road trip where we go back to Bar Harbor, where we stop off in Boston and head over to, hit all these places and just cruise around just for the heck of cruising.
Yeah.
In a car, that is.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so much. Yeah, Philadelphia also, so much to see.
Yeah.
We
have a lot of history in South Carolina too. So.
Yeah. You just have to go look for it sometimes. So why the Air Force?
Because the Space Force didn't exist yet.
Yes, there's that too.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't do ROTC in college because I was the person least likely to ever have a military career. And the person anybody would least likely pick is somebody who would go in the military. And so I got my degree, taught school for a year, went back to get my master's, and I had 2 roommates, and one of them's boyfriend was in pilot training. And he would fly up in a jet every now and then to visit her. I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And when I was an undergraduate in college, some friends would have me out to their house a lot for the weekend. And he was in the Air National Guard. So when they had drill weekends, they would pick me up. And I would spend the weekend with them and go out to McIntyre Friday night for steak supper and bingo. So I was around a lot of Air Force people and thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then I was about halfway through getting my master's degree and realizing, in another year, I'm going to be finished. And I'm going to have to go back to a small town. And I've never been anywhere and done anything. And about that time, my roommate's boyfriend came in, flew in, and left. And I went, well, maybe I ought to try doing something exciting like that. So I went downtown Columbia, and all the recruiting offices were in a row on one street. And you can't park down there. But I parked in front of the Air Force office because there was a space there. And I talked to them, and they were interested. And then I went to the Army and the Navy and the Marines, and they couldn't have cared less about a woman back then. So I went back, talked to the Air Force guy again. I said, okay, that sounds good. I think I'll go in a year. And he said, when come back? And I went back. I reckon he didn't think he'd see me again. And about 3 months before I was to finish my master's, I went downtown, and the only parking lot downtown was right in front of the Air Force office. So I parked there. And he couldn't believe I'd come back. And I said, I hadn't changed my mind. And he was so eager to get a female with a master's degree coming in that he ran all my paperwork for me, ran me everywhere I had to go. And as soon as I finished my master's, they they accepted me for officer training school, which was a little bit of a, oh wow, I did get it, and nobody in the family believed I'd do it. And then I went and raised my hand, and they went, okay, you'll be back home in a couple of weeks when you find out what it's really like. And I didn't come home, and I didn't come home, and I survived all 90 days and loved it. Well, I didn't like a lot of the basic training, but when I was there, I knew no matter what they did to me, I was determined I was going to finish, because it's just something about it. I love the people in my flight. About 3/4 of them were prior service guys who had gotten a degree and were allowed to go to officer training school and become second lieutenants, and they taught me a lot too. And it was just like, these are great people to be around. And I went in.
And they have good parking spaces available.
Yeah, they have good parking spots. And everybody said, well, you're crazy because you just got a master's in Spanish. I said, oh, don't worry about it. I'm going to ask for Miami. And they said, and I got Miami. I got Homestead. And I've had Homestead twice in Honduras, and lived in Germany 5 years, lived in Korea and all that, lived all over. But the first weekend after I was commissioned and showed up at Homestead, I bought a car, and the second weekend I met my husband. So I pretty much had filled all my squares in the first 2 weeks after I was commissioned. So
Wow.
and so he wasn't stationed there, but he would fly down in an F4, and we'd go out to eat or something, and then he'd fly back to Eglin, and he ended up getting a remote to Korea. So we got married on his mid-tour from Korea. And also that we could get when he left Korea, we could get an assignment together. And doggone it, while we were on our honeymoon, I got recalled and sent to Korea. I had an hour to report. We were in town changing names, and the president of Korea was assassinated. And that's a whole nother story. It takes about 30 minutes to tell that whole story about getting recalled off my honeymoon and deploying over there with all this equipment and stuff. And they got my husband on the same airplane. So I finished my honeymoon in the cargo bay of a C-141 with all my guys snickering at me the whole time, all the way over to Korea. So it was
wild.
So you're in air defense radar?
Yeah.
Battle management? I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I'm a little shocked that with you having this master's in Spanish, they didn't want you in the intelligence.
I didn't take their foreign language test.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the thing is, if you take their foreign language test, they may come grab you for something you don't want to do. And so I just sat on my knowledge that I had Spanish until I was a major, and I made the commander's list, which is not easy to do either. And I had a friend down in Honduras who was in charge of a radar detachment down there, and he wanted me to replace him and all that. So I applied for it, and then I let the cat out of the bag. On my resume, on there I mentioned I had the master's degree in Spanish and had taught. And it was funny because somebody who works in VO told me, he said they were all running around going, hey, did you know Liz Herring spoke Spanish? No, I didn't know. But I got the job, and the Spanish came in quite handy then. But I still refused to test and all that. But it was I found out there are a lot of words they don't teach you when you're getting your master's degree. Like, how do you talk about radar coverage? You need a new heating element for your hot water heater. You need some new power cables, put on. Is it safe to go up the road today? I mean, that was an interesting assignment. I was in and out of the embassy and up and down the mountain and all of that stuff, and flying on little planes to little islands in the middle of nowhere that had radars and all this stuff. I was taking lots of pictures, and somebody said, you need to write all this down and tell your grandkids someday. But it was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I've been up above the clouds, on days, and where you can look right over into Nicaragua. And there have been days when my people would call me on the radio and say that locals stopped their van and told them not to go up to the mountain today. And so I told them, come back down. that meant that there were somebody up there targeting them. And so then we just radio up and tell the crew up there, you're not coming down today. You got to wait a day. But
Mm.
it was a interesting thing, keeping people safe.
I guess you were kind of like the real life part of Narcos for that TV show, or is that?
No, because two of the radars I visited did drug interdiction stuff, but we didn't do drug interdiction. We were co-located with the Honduran Air Force,
Okay.
and it was their radar, not our Air Force's, and they had their radar equipment and piped it down to a facility on base where all the people sat on scopes, and I had my own radar van up there with 2 scopes and a little hut that people lived in. And the Army had helicopters at an Army base there, and if they had an emergency or needed to touch down because of bad weather, it was so mountainous, they could always talk to my radar people who would
Okay.
keep an eye out for them and flight follow them. But if they touched down, they would tell my people, who would call the base and tell them the planes were safe, because if they didn't get back on time and the planes didn't hit and the base didn't hear from them, they'd have to launch search and rescue.
Yeah.
So we were basically safety monitoring them
Okay.
and not involved at all with drug interdiction.
This is
But
fascinating stuff. I mean, you
Yeah,
should consider writing this up.
Yeah.
yeah. The Americans that did do drug interdiction were on a little island that was north of Roatan, out in the middle of nowhere, and it was just long enough to land a plane on. And we had a radar and some people, and the Mill Group people wanted to go check on some stuff, and they drug me along with them because I knew radars, and that was my career field those people were in. And so I let them fly me out in a King Air, and they had to buzz the rock patch. It's really a little rock patch, and of course the radar people could see us coming because they have radar, and the radar is at the end of what they called a runway, which is just a flat area, and we had to skip over it and then land, and it was the plane crashed because of the crosswinds. It was just like this way, and then when they reversed the props to break us so we didn't go into the ocean at the other end, it sounded like a hailstorm, all the pebbles that were hitting the bottom of the airplane.
Wow.
And I sitting there going, woohoo. And when we got out, we had to inspect the airplane and make sure there was no damage and we could safely take off. And they said we had one shot at taking off. We were going in the water, we're going in the air, and we went in the air, and thank goodness. But that was interesting, and I saw iguanas all over the place on the island, and I was scratching my head, and I said, well, have y'all ever hit an iguana when you landed here? And they said, yeah. I said, well, what was that like? And he went, thump.
Yeah.
And also, there's another place we landed that was actually paved that we had to buzz it until the cows left.
Yeah, there's once at a local, like we call it African lion safari here, and I got stuck. My dad went there and got stuck in a herd of water buffalo.
Ooh.
Sure,
Just
Yeah.
moved on to the road, and we were like, you're supposed to honk to let the park authorities know, but either they didn't know or it took them too long, but eventually they moved on, and it was like, that was really strange.
Yeah. They flew me out to one radar site they landed at sea level, and we were met by 2 guys in 2 Jeep-like vehicles, and we got in the second one, and the colonel got in the first one, and we were going up to see the radar, but we had to see where the road had a rock slide and was partially blocked, where these vehicles could get by, but the refuelers couldn't, so we were going to have to get it cleaned off in a hurry. And as we started up that road, it got more and more like jungle, and then I started hearing noises I'd never heard before, and then we were in the clouds, and then we got to the rock slide, and the captain, co-pilot, and I got out, and we were wandering around up ahead of the vehicles, and we started hearing all these noises, And then I looked back and saw 2 vehicles, and I looked around, and I looked at him, and I said, "Did you ever see Jurassic Park?" And he looked at me, and his eyes got about this big, and we both turned and went straight back to those vehicles as fast as we could. We were like, "This is too weird for me." I didn't go back there either. That was the one and only trip there.
Okay.
But they do have critters we don't have here.
Certainly true. I guess you also, when you got back out and you left the Air Force as a light colonel, that's pretty cool. I hear that's the best, according to Boss Mongo, that's the best rank in the military.
It is.
Nice.
Yeah, if I had, my colonel's board was coming up, and if I had made colonel, my next assignment would have been in the Pentagon during 9/11.
Oh, wow.
That's where I would have been. And I would have had to wait at least a year or 2 to pin on, and to retire as a colonel, I would have to stay in 3 years. And in my career field, once you've done your time in penitentiary, which is the Pentagon, you go to Turkey. And I had kids.
Yep.
And one of them had finished 10th grade, and the other was 6 years younger. And I thought about moving the family to DC and them never seeing me. And I just walked into my boss's office one day and said, "I'm done, I'm retiring." He couldn't believe it. I said, "Family's next, I got to look after them." And my kids thank me all the time for retiring. And we were at Fort Walton Beach then, and I relocated back to here because this is where all my family had migrated to. So I had a sister and her family, and my father and another sister. So I said, I'm coming back here where they can see what it's like to live around family, which they hadn't had before in their whole lives. And they love it here.
Going to get to what you did in your post-career after colonel, you went into adult education and teaching GEDs. What was that like?
Well, that's really the only kind of teaching I do anymore. I love it because I don't do it as much now. I'm kind of drifting into retirement, but we had open enrollment back then, so people could walk in any day. We would do placement tests, see what they needed to learn, and then make customized lesson plans for each one. And every day when you worked in the morning or the afternoon, you had to work with all these different students working at whatever assignments you've given them, helping each one. So I had to help them with algebra, geometry, reading, writing, math, whatever. And it's always good at the end of the year to find kids who had dropped out of school, who come back, who make it through, and then we have our own graduation. And it's their last chance to get a degree. And some of them work a lot better in adult ed where it's self-paced because they either misbehave because they're bored and can go faster, or they give up because the class passes them by. And here they get to go until they figure it out. And the other thing I did was teaching English as a second language, where I was taught to teach Spanish to English speakers, I just reversed the skills and taught English to Spanish speakers and taught the same way. And those classes, those students thank you every day at the end of class. And now I'm not teaching any classes. I was substituting.
That's interesting. So you're saying that it's more rewarding, perhaps, to teach English to Spanish people than Spanish speakers than to teach Spanish to English teachers. I hadn't thought about that at all before. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, when I was getting my master's, I was teaching Spanish 101 at the university, and I would have to stop class. This was in 86, 87. I'd have to stop class and teach them what a direct object and an indirect object was before I could teach it to them in Spanish, because they did not understand what I was trying to do. And so I'd stop and have an English grammar lesson and do that. But, you got kids in college. You know how college kids are. Half of them want to just sit outside in the sun all day. But when people work all day in a job and then they come to your class at night to learn English, they're serious. And every day that you're there for them, they thank you. and they appreciate it. And I don't know how many are citizens and how many aren't. We don't ask them. But I do know that I had one that was a refugee from Africa who came in, didn't speak any English. She stuck with us a couple of years, finished our program and tested out, and went over to Midlands Tech and became a nurse's assistant. And she had learned enough English where the other students helped her where she was having trouble. She became a nurse's assistant and told me that she was one day going to become a nurse and her son was going to be a doctor.
Nice.
And she was determined. She had seen, she had been without. On the other hand, in GED, you had kids who didn't really, they just knew they had to have a degree, but they didn't value, a lot of them didn't value learning and didn't apply themselves even though they had a brain. And then I had adults who had been laid off and needed a job and couldn't compete with people who had a diploma. So the adults were going back to school and wanted to learn in the worst way and were struggling with some of the math. And sitting right beside them was a high school kid dropout who didn't want to learn and had the capability. And it was depressing. It seemed kind of unfair to me and all that, but it was just interesting. And they used me. Usually there were two of us there, and I was to be the bad cop. And one of them was the loving mom, and I was the bad cop and all that, because I would just use a little of my military on them and straighten them out if they weren't working. And I had all kind of little tricks. And one day they were giving the two teachers such a hard time. The boss told me, he called me up and asked me if I could come in. And I got dressed and went in. He said, well, we don't need you now. As soon as we told them you were coming in, they all got up and signed out and left. It's like, okay. But it was, you just don't have, since it's not compulsory, if a kid's isn't working, you can tell them to sign out and leave. And for some of them, that's a scary thought because their grandparents dropped them off, or their parents, and their parents don't want to have to leave work and come pick them up.
Yeah.
So, but you don't have to keep anybody who's not there to work. I just say, hey, looks like you're done work and sign out, bye. Mm-hmm. And you do that once or twice, and they tend to stay on task.
Excellent.
Every now and then, one of them will test you, and I went in one class with the start of summer school, and a student was using a copier and using the expensive paper that's only for teachers, and I told her not to. And she told me it was none of my business, that she didn't have to listen to me. And I took her right out in the hall, and when I finished, she was in tears, and she never messed with me again. So that was it. It's like, we're not putting up with that. And so they need it because for some of them, it might be the first real chance of some discipline they have. They're probably not getting it at home.
Yep.
And but the ones that want to work, it's so rewarding to see them go across the stage and their families are there and they get their diplomas and all of that. And everybody, they're so happy and so proud. You lose some, but the ones you save make it worthwhile.
Wow. This is, I think, turning into one of our best shows yet.
Hey, I have like 3% battery on this thing right now. Just so if I go away, it's
you know what? We're at the nearly the end of this episode. Why don't we end on a high note? That was pretty.
That was great.
And not one bit of politics either.
I know, that's what's been getting to me. I was like, holy crap, we've gone through the whole episode without having to mention any certain people. So why don't I ask you the traditional question? Who would you like to see us interview next?
James Lilacs.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd love to get one of the founders, but this is,
that might not happen.
Kevin Creighton, if he can, he does write for another publication. I don't know if he can or not, but I hang around a lot on Firing Line because of our love of guns. And he always has some interesting stuff to say. Bob Thompson.
Bob who?
Posts a lot. And then look at who all joined your little group there and just watches.
Yep.
You know, they're just watching. You know, they're interested, so maybe they should be easy to tag anybody who's joined.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks for coming in, and we'll see you around, and I'll be posting
This was a
later
lot
tonight.
of fun. A lot
Yeah,
of
this
good
has been
stories
great.
here.
I mean,
This is
like I
just
said,
solid stuff.
one of our best shows yet. And we didn't. I can actually share this to my friends because we didn't talk about certain people. Okay.
Good.
So I'm
Nice to know I'm
Dave.
not the raving lunatic I come across sometimes in my post. You know. So,
They were all raving lunatics to be
no.
sometimes on Ricochet. Anyways,
Yeah.
I'm Dave March, and this has been Land of Confusion.
Excellent. Thanks. Take care.
See you
Thank
guys.
you.